Good afternoon, welcome. I'm Mita Kaur, I'm Chair of the Board of Trustees of the RTPI. You'll be very glad to hear I am not going to be up here for more than about 2 minutes, because obviously this event is not about me at all. As I said, welcome to today's event. You know, this is the most important event in the RTPI calendar every year. It's an opportunity to celebrate and to hear from our outgoing president and our incoming president. And I think to really recognise and acknowledge the enormous amount of time and commitment and energy and passion that they bring to this role. Because it definitely takes all of those things and far more other qualities as well. Our incoming president, Lindsay, and our outgoing president, Sue, both have all of those qualities and more. And they're also two of the nicest, kindest, funniest people that you could meet. People already know. We'll be hearing from Lindsay a little bit later with some thoughts from her on her year ahead. First, we'll be hearing from Sue with some reflections from her on the incredibly busy year that she had last year. Before I hand over to Sue, I do want to take the opportunity to extend thanks to her on behalf of the board for all her input and experience and wisdom to the board over the last few years. Last year it was as trustee president, but before that as chair of the board. On a personal note, I also want to extend my personal thanks to Sue for all the support and advice and wisdom she's given me since I joined the board a few years ago. Then as I became her vice chair, and then last year in my first year as full-on chair of the board. That was a bit of a whirlwind. Above all, I want to thank her for her very mischievous and quite frankly naughty sense of humour that she brings to everything that she does. Gotta love that, Sue Bridge. The stage is yours.
Oh boy. Thank you, Rita. And yes, it's been wonderful. I've really enjoyed my year, but I really enjoyed the 3.5 years before that when I was chair of the Board of Trustees, because that is, that's really hard work, and I extend my sympathies to Mita for having to pick it all up. Anyway, I hope that some of this will demonstrate my mischievous sense of humour, because it isn't a serious speech. Although I'll start on a bit of a serious note, if I may, because preparing a valedictory speech, looking back on the year, and I'm sure the many past presidents in the room will know, that it is a time to capture your special moments and your special memories, of which I have had so many this year. I started the year by making the welfare and well-being of planners, 2023 a year to remember. So I started the year by making the welfare and well-being of planners my priority for the year, by highlighting some of the issues our members face in their day-to-day work: abuse from the public, misinformation in social media, and a lack of support from employers. Some of that came out of the big conversation, some of it came out of my own experiences working in local government and in the private sector. And I was heartened that the issue was picked up in the member survey in the Planner magazine, which had a huge response. And also we discussed and talked to it with other planning organisations, including PAS, POS, and the TCPA. We do love our acronyms, don't we? So that is the Planning Advisory Service, the Planning Officers Society, and the Town and Country Planning Association, to name but few of the organisations who've been in discussion with us over the year. I was therefore delighted when our campaign, It Takes a Planner and, was launched on World Town Planning Day in November. So that is, it takes a planner and all of us. It takes a planner and you. It takes a planner and everybody to create the society that we want to live in. And today at the General Assembly, we considered how to take the campaign to the next level by demonstrating the value of planners and planning and counteracting the misconceptions by encouraging groups and organisations to engage positively with planners and planning. During the year, the GA has also held a series of debates on issues which affect our profession. We held a series of debates or discussions on strategic planning, the impact of AI and digital on the way we work, and we also debated whether or not the purposes of the Green Belt are fit for purpose in the 21st century. A report of those discussions will be published shortly, and I would thank the GA and those members of the GA who are here today for their enthusiastic participation in the debates, all our guest speakers during the course of the year, and the comms and policy teams of the RTPI for their invaluable assistance in making the debates happen. So that's the serious stuff. So I've had a wonderful year, meeting so many people in our volunteers in the nations and the regions, working with dedicated staff, meeting members, partners, stakeholders at home and abroad. And I would like to share some of those moments with you. But firstly, some things that didn't go too well. Conspiracy theories got the oxygen of publicity, with the 15-minute city conspiracy being reported by government ministers. The climate emergency did not get the attention that it needed during the year. The train strikes meant that my carbon footprint was much bigger than it should have been, and I was also a lot more exhausted of driving up and down the M5 than I should have been. And I met the 14th, the 15th, and the 16th Housing and Planning Minister since 2010. The 14th and the 16th being one and the same person, Nick Rowley. So that's not too bad, is it, for a whole year when things didn't go so well. But there were many things and many people that made me smile. Wait, some of you are on here. So yes, that is the first Dalek that was ever made, and yes, it really is a rubber plunger. So we have our young planners being young planners. We have vice presidents and presidents. We've got Ozzy the Bull, that was tremendous, from the Commonwealth Games. Sean the Sheep, and that one at the bottom, the notice, no manifestation of feeling on behalf of the public will be allowed during council meetings. That sums it all up to me, and that was in the York Council, the old Mansion House chamber. So those were some of the things that tickled me during the year. But the visits to the nations and regions are the most rewarding part of a president's year. They say that an army marches on its stomach, and the RTPI definitely marches on through the strengths of its members, particularly our army of volunteers. Our volunteers are ably supported by our regional coordinators and their national equivalents. Without them, our volunteering capacity would be greatly reduced, which is why the President's Award for 2023 goes to the regional coordinators and the organisers in the nations. And I thank them all for their support during the course of this year, and I know that our volunteers will also thank them for the work that they do. So those are some of the volunteers that I met during the year. So there were many winners throughout the year, with the regional and national award ceremonies, commendation from our EDI policy and comms at the MENCOM Award. And of course, as president, you do get to go to a lot of these ceremonies, and they are sometimes very, very rewarding, but sometimes they can be a little bit over the top and long, very long. I visited 6 universities. I met teaching staff, students and apprentices. And speaking to the students and apprentices is actually one of the most rewarding things. Their enthusiasm is so engaging and it really does enthuse you and make you happy that we are planners and that we can tap into this army of young people coming through behind us. I also gave speeches and sat on many panels. I've actually lost count. I started going through my diary to see how many speeches, conferences, and panels. I got bored and I lost count of how many. I also learned a lot about planning in my visits, conferences and seminars. Every day is a school day in this wonderful profession of ours. I'm going to test you on this later, and I expect you to remember that it takes 6.5 million Lego bricks to cover the width and length of the Tyne Bridge, which was the best thing I learned this year. I also chaired meetings of the Global Planners Network, met many planners on the international stage through UN Habitat, ISOCARP, the Commonwealth Association of Planners and other groups and organisations. And of course I went to COP28. So in the last month or so, I have been asked many times what has been the highlight of my year, the best visit, the most unforgettable moment. So I was lucky enough to be able to visit many of our award winners, especially my trip to York City Council, where I met the winners of the 2022 Silver Jubilee Cup for their housing delivery programme. But it would be invidious, really, to pick any of the regional visits because every one of them is special in their own particular way. However, I am going to pick one. And this is one that I thought nothing would trump, which was my visit to the Northern Ireland to one of the winners of their regional awards, the Linen Mill Studios. It was a winner for its economic benefit and sustainability credentials, but actually it was the best fun I had all year. And as you can see, we all had a really good time. It was amazing. We spent all morning in there. Nothing to do with planning at all. So, did that get trumped? Actually, yes, it did. Oh, I shouldn't actually use that word, should I? So that was the best. I really enjoyed that. Until I was invited to speak at the Bhutan Government Pavilion at COP28. COP28 itself was an amazing experience. But as a planner, I was overwhelmed to learn that the development plan for their capital city is based on the concept of gross national happiness. Not GDV, not GDP, but happiness. Not only that, but the criteria for determining happiness are smart, sustainable, and holistic. They involve the whole community. They're also subject to rigorous monitoring and reporting on a regular basis. I just found the whole thing so uplifting, and actually it did make me happy. So, in closing, I hope that I've been a good ambassador for the profession. I hope I have lived up to your expectations when you elected me to be your president in 2023. I would like to thank everyone, the RTPI staff, the members, and our exceptional volunteers for giving me a year to remember. And it is now time for me to hand over to Lindsay, your president for 2024.
So this is the moment I pass over the past president's medal to you, Sue. Thank you. And also, just want to give you a token, a small token. It's quite small inside. This is an appreciation, I think, from all of us, but actually for the work that you've done, the passion that you've displayed, and it's just a small token of my gratitude.
Before I let Lindsay speak, I just want to say,
As usual.
what are the chances of two consecutive presidents having worked for the same local authority, although not at the same time?
This feels like Bridesmaids, actually, so I'm going to top that by what is the chances of a president living in the next village to a past president, Mr. Akers. So, Sue, thank you. And as I say, it's a small gift of gratitude from me for the guidance and support that you've given me over the year. And it's gone so quickly. So welcome, Helen, and make the most of your year because it will go extremely quickly. So I now feel the weight of the responsibility and accountability now that I wear the chain of office. So it's a tremendous honour for me to take this and to be joined by, actually, when I look around this room, so many. I said to Sue, this is full of everybody that I really like. It's all the people that so I'm really happy to be amongst you all. So a great valedictory speech. It's great to see the photos and actually great to see the slides, the fun you've had, the commitment, and actually a phenomenal year with lots of events and networking, but actually influencing. I've already gone off my speech, and this is what's going to happen actually during them. So, again, thank you for supporting me through the vice presidential year, and I can be ready for what's going to be the most significant and important year in my planning career. And it's hard to believe that the future of planning is in my hands. Well, it's not. It's in all our hands, including the non-planners who are here this evening. And there's something around that later, around talking around grabbing the narrative and actually the storytelling which we were hearing about and discussing this afternoon. So, a warm welcome to my guests, including my husband, David, and friends and former colleagues who have become long-standing and dear friends. And welcome also to the Board of Trustees, members from abroad, members of the GA, past presidents, volunteers, and also those members watching online later through the course of the year. And of course, a special thank you to Victoria, our chief exec, who supported me this year as vice president, and I know we will work well together in the coming year, so thank you. And also thank you for the team at the RTPI for making it all possible today. So I suppose at this point it would only be polite to say goodbye to Dave, because Dave, it's going to be a busy year, so so sorry about that. But I have the honour of being the 110th RTPI president, and when I look around the room and I think about my predecessors, there are names that resonate me throughout all my career, and especially in my early planning education. And these are individuals who've had significant influence in the field of planning and on me. And I suppose today we would call them influencers. And I'll come back to the need of planning influencers in today's society. Our past presidents have included academics, practitioners, critical thinkers, and indeed professionals from other built environment professions. And I'm pleased to see some of those representatives here this evening. So many of you will be familiar, you wouldn't have known, but familiar with Thomas Adams, who was the first town planning advisor to the British government in 1909. And he became our first president in 1914 and 1915, when he, with others, launched what we called then simply the Planning Institute. And this was in recognition that planning had a place in society at that time. Adams was immediately followed by Sir Raymond Unwin, and Sir Best, Lord Best spoke about Unwin this afternoon, and we heard about that. And his focus was on the improvement of the working class housing, and of course the creator of Letchworth Garden City, based on Ebenezer Howard's utopian plan. Sir Desmond Heap, president in 55 to 56, produced what could be described as the first planning manual, covering the new planning legislation and what was to become the encyclopedia of planning law. And I'm sure we're all familiar and have used that in our working lives. And I want to, of course, mention Sylvia Law. She was the first woman to be elected president in 1974. And we might ask why it took so long. But in fact, a female president was very forward-looking in the early 1970s. And today, we see a more favourable gender balance. The RTPI State of the Profession survey shows that 40% of planners are in fact women, and there is in fact a greater balance in the younger professional members. And this is a great achievement when compared against many other built environment professions. And whilst Sylvia was an early advocate for women in the profession, her focus was around the provision and value of community open space, green spaces, and the value that they make in the urban environment. And that remains important today. And another eminent planner from my university days was Gordon Cherry. I mentioned Gordon as he was the external examiner at Sheffield University, and I recall a rather pleasant conversation with him, Tony, about rural depopulation. Cherry specialised in the history of planning and had numerous academic achievements on the role and value of planning. And above that, he supported and motivated planning graduates and students. Really important. These past presidents and the other 100 or so, which I'm not going to reference, you'll be glad to hear, helped to raise the profile of planning and its contribution to creating a more equitable society at times when public health and poor housing needed addressing. They promoted the need for high-quality housing and accessible services and facilities. They acknowledged the contribution of open space, green space, and in those early days of profession, they understood the need to capture what I will call, and I think we all call, the art of planning into guidance and practice notes. But we don't have to go that far back to see a cycle of what's emerging themes. Since the first president in 1914, we've seen significant improvements in housing standards, infrastructure, the provision of open space, improved environmental standards, better housing quality, environmental protection, improved public health and well-being. But today, we still face issues in many, if not all, of those areas. And there are the additional challenges that society faces today, including climate change, lack of infrastructure, poor public transport and the lack of access to it, and the inequalities in communities where we still see deprivation and poor mental health. So, having heard all that, you might be forgiven in thinking that we've made little progress. As planning professionals, we've made strides, but there remains so much more to do, and planning, I would say, is the key to resolving many of those issues. Together, we need to promote the key role that planning contributes in our communities. We've heard about that this afternoon at the General Assembly. We need to take control and manage the narrative. We need to make sure that the contribution to the local and national economy is understood and how it addresses environmental challenges and strives for a more equitable society. I just want to reference and signpost you to the RTPI Planning the World, Planning Your World, which is a resource that aims to raise awareness of the planning profession. And there's a toolkit there to support such conversations. We all need to be influencers. Together, we all need to promote planning as a career choice in both early education and early career. I want young people to understand that they can be part of planning our future. But in the early stages of 2024, we face a year of further change, a general election where planning and housing supply will be key policy issues. We are certain to see further planning reforms, the potential, and I quote, threat of bulldozing through planning, climate change contributing to natural disasters such as flooding, and the intensity and frequency of storms which we've experienced over the last month and the last couple of days, in fact. We are sharing these experiences globally. But are we, as a profession, ready, and have we got proper resource to tackle these issues? Because it's clear to me that we face a planning profession that is struggling, reduced resources in local authority planning departments who face unprecedented levels of vacant posts and skill shortages. And we see experienced planning professions leaving the profession, and a shift, I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but a shift from the public to the private sector. And this is hardly attractive to those looking to choose their career path. So last autumn, the RTPI published the Planning Manifesto, and this is aptly referred to as the Planifesto. This was used at the party conferences to promote the profession, highlighting the interventions which would address current challenges that a new party or government would be faced. Properly resourcing the planning sector is a priority, and we saw some positive outcomes in the last year's autumn statement, funding local authorities, bursary schemes. But I ask you, is that going to be enough? And whilst we look forward to 2024 and the prospect of a general election, we remind ourselves that the issues and challenges that our profession faces is all too familiar. And this is not only in your speech last year, Sue, where you talked eloquently about challenges in resourcing and the misunderstanding around the sector. And we talked about misinformation, which again, we will be hearing more of this year. But misinformation feeding our minds, but we can look further back. And I'm going back 20 years, in 2003, where our past president, Vincent Goodstadt, somewhere, I'm seeing him this evening, Vincent raised the issue of unrealistic expectations, reduced staff numbers and deregulation. We united as an institute in addressing unjustified criticism and looking at new ways to send out nationally a strong counter message, proclaiming the quality, diversity and depth of planning. And that was 20 years ago. And then 10 years on, Peter Geraghty said that planners faced planning reforms like no other, with the introduction of the MPPF in 2012. The President stated at that time, a creative planning system requires properly resourced planning services. And we saw at that time planners employed by local planning authorities dropped by 12.6% between October 2010 and 2012. Does this sound familiar for the coming year? We're still in that position. 20 years on, we are still raising issues about resourcing the planning function to a point where we can legitimately now say planning is in a real crisis. We've continued to see reduced funding in planning departments, and I've mentioned increased number of vacancies and professionals actually leaving the profession. And there's numerous reasons why this is happening, and that includes, amongst other things, salaries which haven't kept pace. Indeed, last year, when I was working for Homes England, I met a senior planner working in a local authority in the Northwest. And I was asking him about his role and whether or not he was a chartered member and his contribution in terms of planning, etc. And in fact, he told me that he'd recently just moved within the same local authority to the housing department. And that was because the pay was greater in the housing department than in the planning department. I ask you, how can that be? Last year, the Planner Careers Survey highlighted a number of challenges facing planning professionals. And while salaries were raised as an issue, one of the key standout findings was that almost all planners felt that social media fueled misinformation about planning. And this has led, we've heard, to increased aggression and personal attacks on those individuals. And this, together with media headlines around planning delays, planners being blockers, the process not working, and planning reforms has increased anti-planning, and I'll call it an anti-planning movement. And this hardly advocates planning as a career choice for our young people. Last year, the RTPI launched the It Takes Planners And campaign, to which Sue has referred. And this is a clear call to action to use a toolkit, case studies, and build on that toolkit to illustrate the beneficial impact of planning on local communities. We need to highlight and promote the work that we do and the value that we add and we bring. We want a wider understanding of our role to encourage young people into the profession and to address the anti-planning. I stress again, we need to become influencers to address the current wave of anti-planning. And I talk about anti-planning because anti-planning is not new. I stand here, and I'm really proud to stand here as your 2024 RTPI President. And I just want to share something about my early experience in planning. I come from a family of small house builders, and I suppose today we'd call it an SME. My grandfather set up the company with my father and uncle, and initially built in the northwest of England, and that was during the 1930s. But post-war, my grandfather moved the business to Ireland, and the reason for that was that he had a personal crusade against the 1947 Town and Country Planning Act. And he opposed the introduction of planning regulations and the need to obtain planning permission for development. And in fact, we heard this afternoon Lord Best talking about regulation, and he was saying that actually, I think there was a preference for the Black Death rather than regulation, not necessarily planning regulation. But my grandfather took his personal demonstration out of the UK and basically continued to oppose the principles and purpose of planning. So I come from a background rooted in anti-planning. When my grandfather returned to the UK, I think he was probably banned from the local planning office, or certainly he wasn't a welcome visitor. And it was really quite embarrassing because I did a placement at my local planning office in Lancaster, and so I used to sort of disassociate myself with my grandfather. My father was actually more conciliatory, and he supported me in my career, and I know he would have been proud of me today, as is my mother. So against that background, I often wonder what inspired me to consider planning as a career rather than just being a stubborn teenager and thinking I was going to oppose my grandfather. But perhaps it was to put right the stance of my grandfather, which he took, maybe. More likely, it was an inspirational geography teacher and those early Burgess and Hoyt models of urban structure. Maybe it was a love of the outdoors and the rural environment, walking, cycling, riding. Maybe it was an appreciation of safe space or the efficient use of resources. Maybe appreciating life at a slow pace, time to consider architecture and the finer detail of buildings. And maybe thinking about what made a street lively, safe, and a pleasure to walk along. I don't know. Who knows? But above all, I wanted to be part of a profession who protects, enhances, and understands our environment. I studied at Sheffield University under the guidance of the esteemed Professor Tony Crook, who I'm glad to say I still work with alongside today. I wasn't a good student, but I knew I wanted to be a planner. My first job was in the Midlands, starting at Daventry Council, and then moving all 15 miles to Northampton Borough, and there I remained for the next 15 years. And then I heard Sue was coming, so I quickly sort of moved on. I remained married to the public sector, and I went on to marry a planner. But, Dave, we failed to produce a planner. Max, our son, went into finance instead. And I can't believe all those holidays and those city trips where we would point out the beautiful buildings and how spaces worked. He wasn't having any of it. So I joined Milton Keynes Partnership, which was a subcommittee of the English Partnerships in 2005, and I stayed with the agency through its merger with the Housing Corporation to form Homes and Communities Agency. And that was under the great, late Sir Bob Kerslake. And then subsequently, I stayed under the change to Homes England, where my last roles were head of planning and also head of profession. But it was the role as head of profession that was really important to me, and it was around promoting membership, chartership, coordinating CPD, and ensuring planners had a voice in driving quality standards and sustainability within the agency. So a professional life for me, wholly working in the public sector, but working for a government agency provided me with the experience in housing delivery, the ability to promote best practice, leading on government initiatives, and working alongside both the private and the public sector. It's a career of nearly 40 years, and I can't believe that. But it's part of a profession which makes significant contribution in growing the economy and ensuring social and environmental outcomes which support local communities. So, there's a question here. Why aren't we attracting enough people into the profession? And why aren't we retaining those professionals who initially make that career choice? I'm getting there. I made reference in my opening to planning now being in a real crisis. So I want to make the focus of my presidential year to build on Sue's work on resourcing and raising the profile of planning. It will build on our current campaigns and look to future campaigns to address these current issues. My focus for the coming year is simply summed up as planning our future. This is about ensuring planning is at the forefront in conversations on the built environment, climate change, the rural environment, safer streets, green spaces. Ensuring the remit of planning is understood outside of the profession, fueling curiosity with the subject, and ensuring a pipeline of planners coming into the profession and also into the Institute as members. I want to specifically channel raised awareness and understanding of planning towards young people and achieve an early interest in planning as a career choice and building that pipeline of young professionals. Planning our future aligns with the thinking of our younger generation who are fully aware of the issues around climate change, environmental challenges, and the need for immediate action. We need to make the connection to the role that the planning profession undertakes and the contribution planning makes in addressing these issues. We've all got a role to play in this. We all need to be influencers and support growing the pipeline of planners that planning is a worthy career choice. This coming year, I will focus on what I call early intervention, a focus on understanding what careers advice is available and how we, as an institute, can promote planning in schools and in higher education. We want diversity in our workplace so we can maximise creativity and contribution. And we want a range of backgrounds, disciplines and ethnicity to ensure our profession represents our communities. We need to reach out to communities where representation is lacking. The coming year, I want to increase our presence in schools and universities where we can promote planning as a career choice and also make the important connection with other disciplines being a foundation to further learning. Last year, we saw a record number of graduates becoming licentiates, so we must build on this success. I will support the Balance initiative, which supports the themes of education and attracting new talent as part of the Institute's Change Action Plan on diversity and inclusion. Balance, which is Build a Legacy and New Community Equality, is a corporate strategy funded project to develop a new outreach strategy for member engagement with young people. I can announce we've been working with an expert consultant towards the ultimate aim of achieving a broader range of pupils from different subjects and underrepresented areas, becoming aware of planning education and the range of exciting careers that it can bring. More specifically, the project seeks a renewed focus in areas where there is a high demand for houses and where new large-scale development is likely to be located. It will ask RTPI volunteers to focus on those schools of greater educational need and diversity. I want this to bring a more diverse cohort into the profession, which will not only lead to better outcomes, but to be a more inclusive sector. I will promote the continued growth of the Institute's successful apprenticeship programmes. We heard from Sue about how actually motivational that is. And I will support alternative routes into planning education across the UK. And this will be achieved by encouraging more employers to engage with the programme and also have an increased focus on local authorities to take on increased numbers of apprenticeships. I want to encourage more training providers to come forward and, of course, continue to encourage governments to back our apprenticeship and bursary proposals. In building awareness in both what we as planners do and how we access the many pathways into planning, together we can build a pipeline of planners. But we must also nurture the existing pipeline of planners. We need to understand why graduate planners are not entering the profession. And I'm pleased to confirm that last month, the RTPI secured funding on behalf of the Built Environment Joint Institute from the Academy of Social Science. And this is to be used to fund research in understanding the gap between the number of students on accredited degree courses within the built environment and those moving into the 6 professions. Because planning, I fear, we lose numbers of those graduates for some reason. And also more worrying is we lose diversity. We're losing an important part of our pipeline, and we need to address this urgently. There are further unanswered questions around existing experienced chartered planners who are currently seeking employment but remain unsuccessful at a time when we're calling out for resources. Again, this support needs to be given in this area. There are many challenges facing the profession, and addressing this is no small feat. Nor is it something I accept can be achieved in 12 months. But I tell you this, I'm fully committed, and I want to secure the foundation for future years so that in the future we might have increased numbers and diversity coming through our apprenticeship programme and additional education establishments looking to offer training. I want to see an increased number of students with an appetite to complete a planning degree and move to chartership, and an increased interest from a wider range of disciplines for postgraduate training. And alongside that, I want to be able to feel that there is a wider understanding around the role that planning plays in our economy and how it tackles social and environmental issues. I accept this is difficult to measure, but as planners, I hope we will feel that change. In closing, you'll be glad to hear. In closing, I simply state, planning is a worthy and rewarding profession. It's a creative art and a profession that protects, enhances and manages our scarce resources within both the built environment and the rural environment. It's collaborative, engaging, but it's currently under-resourced. It's misunderstood and it lacks diversity and a pipeline which allows the profession to truly represent and work with and as part of our local communities. For those of us in the room and those of their members that are watching online after the event, I ask for your support in ensuring that we are followed by a cohort of young planning professionals. So support me, be an influencer, and I want you to engage with planning our future. Thank you. So, Victoria, Sue and I, and Mita would like you to join us for a drink down the hall, I think, on the left-hand side. And it'd be really nice to actually, those of you who don't know each other, to mingle and meet. And it'd be nice to see you down there. So thank you very much.